The echo of his footsteps followed Crane through the empty corridors of Orbital Station Epsilon. 5 years alone had taught him to appreciate the sound, proof that he still existed in this suspended metal world. His fingers brushed against the cold wall panels as he walked. A ritual, more than a necessity, counting the sections until he reached the communications hub. Morning always began the same way. Systems check, atmospheric readings, and then, the most important task, scanning for signals from the surface. For 60 months, he had maintained this routine with religious dedication, believing that someone down there might still be transmitting, might still need the relay systems he kept functioning. 60 months of silence had not eroded his resolve. Crane settled into the worn chair that had molded itself to his form over the years. The leather squeaked as he leaned forward to activate the primary console. Screens illuminated the otherwise dim room, bathing his face in a pale blue glow that accentuated the hollows beneath his cheekbones and the premature lines around his eyes. Station log, day 1825. He spoke, voice slightly hoarse from disuse. Orbital integrity remains stable. Oxygen recycling at 93% efficiency. No anomalous readings in the atmosphere. Beginning surface scan. His fingers danced across the controls with practiced efficiency. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a map of the planet below, a world once vibrant and blue, now shrouded in a perpetual haze of dust and cloud. The war had changed everything, leaving the surface a patchwork of ruins and radiation hotspots. But somewhere down there, life persisted. Crane had to believe that, or his vigil became meaningless. The scanner hummed, sweeping across designated sectors. Crane monitored the readings, sipping the synthetic coffee that tasted nothing like the real thing, but kept his mind sharp. He allowed himself 1 cup each morning, a luxury in a world of rationed supplies. Thousands of miles below, separated by vacuum and devastation, Serena crawled through the ruins of what had once been a thriving metropolis. Her armor, once gleaming with the insignia of the Karnath clan, was now scratched and dented, splattered with dried blood, both hers and others. The biomechanical suit had kept her alive through 3 days of continuous combat, but each movement now sent waves of agony through her failing body. The infection had spread further than she'd initially assessed. The biological weapon that had contaminated her armor systems during the final assault was designed for just this purpose: slow, excruciating deterioration, giving the victim time to witness their own disintegration. A cruel mercy compared to instantaneous death. Serena dragged herself into the shadow of a collapsed skyscraper, the armor's servos whining in protest as she propped herself against a concrete slab. Through her cracked visor, she gazed up at the clouded sky, wondering if anyone was looking down. The communications array built into her helmet had been damaged in the last firefight, but military-grade emergency systems might still function. With trembling fingers, she accessed the armor's auxiliary power, redirecting it to the emergency beacon. It would drain what little energy remained, possibly accelerating the spread of the contamination without the suit's countermeasures. But she had little choice. Death was certain. The only variable was time. She activated the beacon and closed her eyes, listening to the soft ping as it sent its desperate call upward. 1 ping, 2, 3. Then silence as the power diverted to life support once more. Whether anyone would hear those few seconds of transmission seemed unlikely, but Serena had been a warrior long enough to know that hope, however faint, was sometimes all that separated the living from the dead. In the stillness that followed, she allowed her mind to drift to memories of home, verdant mountains that now existed only in her recollection, family faces that had been reduced to ash years ago. The Karnath clan had stood against the first wave of attacks, their mountain stronghold holding firm while lowland cities fell. But no fortress, no matter how impregnable, could withstand the biological weapons that followed. Serena had been off-world when the contamination began, part of a special operations unit deployed to sabotage enemy supply lines. She returned to find her clan decimated, survivors scattered and dying. She had fought on, finding purpose in revenge, until that purpose too was stripped away in the final ceasefire that left no true victors. Now, alone in the ruins, she waited for the end, wondering if anyone would remember the Karnath clan or the countless others who had perished. Her armor, once a symbol of pride and protection, had become her coffin. Back on Epsilon Station, Crane nearly spilled his coffee as the scanner emitted a shrill alert. His eyes widened as he focused on the readout. A signal, faint and fragmented, but unmistakably artificial, had been detected from Sector 7, an area he had written off months ago due to heavy radiation and structural instability. "Computer, analyze signal pattern," he commanded, setting aside his cup and leaning forward. Signal analysis complete. The station's AI responded in its flat, feminine voice. Pattern matches emergency beacon, military grade, Karnath clan designation. Crane felt his heart race. The Karnath clan had been elite warriors, renowned for their advanced armor systems and tactical prowess. But reports indicated they had been wiped out during the third year of the war, victims of a particularly virulent strain of weaponized pathogens. "Location coordinates?" he asked, already pulling up maps of Sector 7. "Coordinates established. Warning: area shows high levels of structural instability and moderate radiation. Atmospheric toxicity exceeds safe parameters for unprotected exposure." Crane barely heard the warnings. His mind raced with possibilities. Someone was alive down there. Someone who might need help, who could provide answers, who could end his isolation. The rational part of his brain cautioned against hasty action. His role was to maintain the station, to serve as a communications relay. Yet 5 years of solitude had left him starved for human contact. "Prepare the drop shuttle," he decided, standing abruptly, "and ready a surface survival kit." "Protocol violation," the AI countered. "Station personnel are not authorized to abandon post without direct command authorization." "Override protocol," Crane said, already moving toward the equipment bay. "Authorization code Epsilon Crane 739. Log it as a reconnaissance mission with potential survivor retrieval." The AI fell silent, processing his override. Crane knew he was breaking regulations, potentially endangering the station's function. But the alternative, ignoring what might be the last survivor of a legendary warrior clan, was unthinkable. Within an hour, he had the shuttle prepped and loaded with essential supplies, medical equipment, emergency rations, radiation shields, and atmospheric filters. The small craft wasn't designed for extended surface operations, but it would get him to the coordinates and back, assuming no complications arose. As the shuttle bay depressurized, Crane felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror. He hadn't set foot on the surface since before the war's end, and reports suggested conditions had deteriorated further since then. Yet the ping of that beacon drew him like a moth to flame. "Initiating drop sequence," he announced to the empty shuttle, more from habit than necessity. "Destination: Sector 7. Coordinates locked." The shuttle disengaged from the station with a mechanical shudder, and Crane felt the momentary weightlessness of free fall before the guidance thrusters engaged. Through the viewport, he watched Epsilon Station recede, its solar arrays gleaming in the unfiltered sunlight. For a moment, he questioned his decision, wondering if he would ever see that metal sanctuary again. The descent through the atmosphere was rougher than anticipated. Dust storms had intensified since his last readings, buffeting the shuttle with debris and reducing visibility to near zero. Crane relied heavily on instruments, gripping the controls with white-knuckle determination as proximity alarms blared warnings of unseen obstacles. When he finally broke through the lower cloud layer, the landscape below stole his breath. What had once been a sprawling urban center was now a jagged wasteland of toppled buildings and craters. The streets that had once formed an orderly grid were buried beneath rubble or transformed into chasms by bombardment. Nothing moved in this graveyard of civilization except dust clouds swirling in the toxic wind. The beacon signal guided Crane to a partially collapsed structure that might once have been a government building or corporate headquarters. Landing was impossible in the debris field, forcing him to set down nearly half a kilometer away in what had been a public square, now a relatively flat expanse of pulverized concrete. Crane sealed his environmental suit, checking the oxygen levels and radiation shields twice before cycling the airlock. The first breath of filtered outside air tasted metallic despite the suit's purification systems. Gravity felt strange after years in the station's artificial field. Heavier, more insistent, as though the planet itself resented his return. He trudged through the ruins, scanner in hand, following the beacon's pulse. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of debris beneath his boots and the occasional groan of settling structures. No birds, no insects, no signs of the natural world reclaiming the ruins, as it might have in a healthier ecosystem. The signal led him to a mountain of rubble at the base of the skeletal skyscraper. Crane clambered over broken concrete and twisted metal, careful of sharp edges that could puncture his suit. The beacon grew stronger with each step, until his scanner indicated he was nearly on top of the source. Yet he saw nothing. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding strange even to himself after years of speaking to no one but the station's AI. "Is anyone there? I'm responding to an emergency beacon." Silence answered him. Crane swept the scanner in a wider arc, confirming the signal originated from this exact location. Something wasn't right. Either the beacon had been activated and abandoned, or his boot struck something that didn't match the surrounding debris. Kneeling, Crane began to clear away rubble, revealing a curved surface that reflected dully in the filtered sunlight. More digging exposed what was unmistakably a helmet, and inside it, a face. The visor was cracked but not completely shattered, allowing Crane to see the features of a woman. Eyes closed, skin pallid beneath a network of scars. Blood had dried in rivulets from her nose and the corners of her eyes, but slight movement confirmed she was breathing. "Hold on," Crane said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm going to get you out of there." The next hour was a blur of careful excavation. The woman was encased in full-body armor of a design Crane had seen only in military archives. Karnath clan battle armor, capable of sustaining its wearer through conditions that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The suit was a masterpiece of engineering, integrating life support, weapon systems, and tactical enhancements into a relatively lightweight frame. But this particular suit had seen better days. Blood and an unidentifiable fluid seeped from junctions between armor plates. Warning lights blinked on exposed circuitry, and several sections appeared to have been jury-rigged with field repairs. Most concerning were the discolored patches that spread like fungus across the chest plate and left arm, a pattern Crane recognized from briefings on biological warfare. Finally freeing her from the debris, Crane activated his suit's medical scanner, passing it over the armor. The readings confirmed his fears: critical life signs, internal bleeding, and alarming levels of biological contamination. Whatever weapon had been used on her was still active, consuming her from within the very armor designed to protect her. "I need to get you to the shuttle," he told the unconscious woman. "The station has better medical facilities." He attempted to lift her, but discovered the armor, despite its advanced design, was heavier than anticipated, especially under the planet's natural gravity. There was no way he could carry her half a kilometer through unstable terrain. Crane thought quickly. The shuttle had an emergency anti-grav stretcher, but it meant leaving her alone while he retrieved it. Given her condition, any delay could prove fatal. "I'll be back," he promised, squeezing her armored hand though she couldn't feel it. "Hold on just a little longer." The trek back to the shuttle seemed to take 3 times as long as his initial journey. Every fallen beam and shifting pile of debris became an obstacle to be navigated with increasing desperation. By the time he reached the shuttle and secured the stretcher, his suit's oxygen supply had dropped to 60%. Returning to the injured warrior, Crane found her condition unchanged, a mixed blessing. He deployed the anti-grav stretcher alongside her and, with considerable effort, managed to shift her onto the floating platform. Her armor scraped against the stretcher's surface, leaving smears of the mysterious fluid that leaked from its joints. "Hang in there," Crane murmured as he guided the stretcher over the treacherous landscape, choosing his path carefully to avoid jostling his patient. "The shuttle has medical supplies. We'll get you stabilized, then back to the station." Inside the shuttle, Crane connected the woman's armor to the craft's diagnostic systems, hoping to interface with whatever medical protocols the suit might contain. The connection sparked, then stabilized, displaying a cascade of warnings on the shuttle's screen. "System breach detected," the shuttle's computer announced. "Biological contaminant identified. Quarantine protocols advised." Crane hesitated. Quarantine meant sealing the shuttle, possibly even preventing its return to the station if the contamination couldn't be contained. But leaving her behind was not an option he could live with. "Run full decontamination sequence," he ordered. "Priority on life support for the passenger." As the shuttle's systems worked to stabilize the woman and neutralize whatever pathogen had invaded her armor, Crane studied her face through the cracked visor. Despite the blood and pallor, he could see the strength in her features: high cheekbones, a determined jaw, the faint traces of traditional Karnath tattoos at her temples. She was, he realized with a start, beautiful in the way that all survivors of hell are beautiful, marked by pain, but unbroken by it. The shuttle shuddered as another dust storm enveloped it, delaying their departure. Crane used the time to establish a more direct connection to the armor's systems, bypassing damaged circuits to access its medical data. What he found sent a chill through him. The biological agent corrupting the armor wasn't just any weapon. It was a targeted pathogen designed specifically for Karnath genetic markers. It attacked not only the wearer, but the integrated systems of the armor itself, using the suit's own life support mechanisms to deliver the contagion more efficiently to its host. Whoever had engineered this abomination had intimate knowledge of Karnath technology and biology, a betrayal of the highest order. More disturbing still was the timestamp on the infection. Nearly 8 months ago. The woman had been fighting this silent war within her own armor for longer than should have been physically possible. Either the Karnath were even more resilient than their reputation suggested, or this warrior possessed a will to survive that defied medical explanation. The storm abated enough for liftoff, just as the shuttle's diagnostics delivered more bad news. The decontamination sequence had failed to neutralize the pathogen. It was too deeply embedded in the armor systems, too perfectly adapted to resist standard countermeasures. Crane faced an impossible choice: risk bringing an unstoppable contagion back to the station, or abandon his rescue mission and leave the woman to die. Neither option was acceptable. "Computer, are there any medical facilities still operational in this sector?" he asked, knowing the chances were slim. "Negative. All registered medical facilities within 500 kilometers have been confirmed destroyed or abandoned." Crane rubbed his temples, fighting fatigue and the beginning of a tension headache. "Expand search parameters. Include unofficial facilities, research stations, anything with potential medical capability." A pause. Then, one potential match. Underground research facility designated Haven, located 170 kilometers northeast. Status unknown. Last communication logged 3 years ago. "Show me," Crane demanded. The screen displayed a schematic of a subterranean complex built into the side of a mountain range, a facility he had never heard of, despite his supposedly comprehensive knowledge of surface installations. According to the limited data available, Haven had been a joint research initiative focused on counteracting biological weapons, exactly what they needed. Plot course to Haven, he decided, and prepare a transmission to Epsilon Station explaining our diversion. As the shuttle lifted off, buffeted by crosswinds and debris, Crane looked down at his unconscious passenger. "Change of plans," he told her. "But I'm still getting you help." The woman's eyes fluttered open briefly, startlingly green against her ashen skin. Her cracked lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear through the helmet. Crane leaned closer. "What was that? Can you hear me?" Her voice came through faintly, distorted by the damaged helmet systems. "Let me die." Then her eyes closed once more, leaving Crane shaken. He had risked everything to save someone who wanted only to be allowed to surrender. But having come this far, he couldn't honor her request. Not without trying every possible alternative. "Not today," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Not on my watch." The journey to Haven proved more treacherous than anticipated. The shuttle's navigation system struggled with the changed landscape, where landmarks had been obliterated and new obstacles created by war and subsequent environmental collapse. Twice, Crane had to manually override the autopilot to avoid collision with massive debris fields that had once been satellite towns. Throughout the flight, he monitored the woman's vitals, watching with growing concern as her condition deteriorated despite the shuttle's medical interventions. The armor that had kept her alive was now slowly killing her. Its compromised systems, unable to maintain the delicate balance needed for survival. An hour into the journey, proximity alarms blared a warning. Crane's attention snapped to the sensors, which showed 3 fast-moving objects on an intercept course. "Computer, identify pursuing craft," he ordered, already calculating evasive maneuvers. Unknown design, size and propulsion consistent with hunter-killer drones. Weapon signatures detected. Crane cursed under his breath. Hunter-killer drones were autonomous weapons programmed to eliminate any technology they didn't recognize as friendly. Remnants of the war that continued their mission long after the conflict's end. The shuttle, with its civilian design, would register as an acceptable target. "Evasive pattern Delta," Crane instructed, strapping himself in more securely and checking that his passenger was properly secured. "Divert power from life support to engines and countermeasures." The shuttle lurched as it changed course, dropping altitude to skim just above the ruined landscape. Crane hoped the lower flight path would confuse the drone's tracking systems, or at least provide some cover among the debris fields. His hopes were dashed as the first energy pulse struck the shuttle's rear section, sending cascades of warnings across the control panel. The craft shuddered violently, throwing Crane against his restraints hard enough to bruise. "Shields at 60%, the computer reported with infuriating calm. "Minor damage to propulsion systems. Second attack incoming." Crane yanked the controls, sending the shuttle into a spiraling dive between 2 partially collapsed towers. The maneuver bought precious seconds as the drones adjusted their trajectory. But he knew he couldn't outrun or outfight them. The shuttle wasn't designed for combat. "Computer, any potential shelter within immediate range? Something that could block their sensors." "Scanning. Old subway tunnel entrance detected, 2 kilometers ahead. Tunnel dimensions sufficient for shuttle clearance if stabilizers are retracted." It was a desperate gambit, but Crane had no better options. "Plot approach vector. Retract stabilizers on my mark." The shuttle screamed toward the coordinates, its frame protesting the strain as Crane pushed it beyond design specifications. Behind them, the drones closed the distance with mechanical precision, their energy weapons charging for another volley. "Mark!" Crane shouted as they approached the dark maw of the tunnel entrance, barely visible among the rubble. The shuttle shuddered as its external stabilizers folded inward, narrowing its profile just enough to slip into the tunnel with centimeters to spare on either side. Crane cut power to the main engines, switching to maneuvering thrusters only, praying the drone's momentum would carry them past the entrance. 2 did exactly that, overshooting the tunnel in their pursuit. But the third adjusted with inhuman reflexes, slowing just enough to follow them into the darkness. Proximity alert, the computer warned. Pursuing craft, maintaining contact. The tunnel ahead was a nightmare of navigation, partially collapsed in sections, littered with abandoned vehicles and human remains that Crane tried not to look at too closely. He guided the shuttle by instrument readings alone, the darkness broken only by the craft's forward lights and the occasional spark from damaged electrical systems. Behind them, the drone fired again, the energy pulse ricocheting off the tunnel walls and striking the shuttle's underside. Alarms shrieked as systems failed across the board. Critical damage, the computer announced. Engine shutdown imminent. Recommend immediate landing. Crane spotted a wider section of tunnel ahead, an old station platform, relatively intact. Prepare for emergency landing procedures, he instructed, fighting the controls as the shuttle's systems continued to fail around him. The landing, if it could be called that, was more of a controlled crash. The shuttle skidded along the platform, showering sparks as metal scraped against concrete, before coming to rest against a tiled wall adorned with faded advertisements for products long since extinct. In the sudden silence that followed, Crane became aware of two things: the ominous tick of cooling metal that suggested significant damage to the shuttle's hull, and the soft hum of the drone as it approached their position. Weapons still active. Computer, status of medical patient? He asked urgently, unbuckling his restraints. Life signs stable but critical. External armor systems compromised. Internal contamination spreading. Crane moved to the woman's side, checking the connections between her armor and the shuttle's now failing medical systems. The crash had dislodged several, interrupting the treatments that had been keeping her alive. Outside, the drone's humming grew louder. Computer, remaining weapons capability? Crane asked, knowing the shuttle carried only minimal defensive systems. All offensive systems offline. Defensive shields at 12%. Insufficient to withstand direct energy weapon impact. Crane looked around desperately for anything that might serve as a weapon. His eyes fell on the emergency toolkit secured to the wall, basic tools for repair and survival. Not combat. But within it was a plasma cutter designed for slicing through metal in rescue operations. He had just retrieved the cutter when the drone appeared at the shattered viewport, its sensor array glowing a malevolent red as it scanned the shuttle's interior. Roughly the size of a small dog, the drone resembled a metallic insect, with multiple appendages housing different weapon systems and a central eye that swiveled to focus on Crane. Time seemed to slow as Crane raised the plasma cutter, knowing it was a futile gesture against the drone's armored shell. The machine's weapons port began to glow as it prepared to fire, a shot that would likely incinerate both Crane and his unconscious passenger. What happened next occurred so quickly that Crane's mind struggled to process it. A blur of motion from the medical berth, the sound of armor servos straining, a flash of metal as something intercepted the drone's line of fire. The woman from the ruins stood between Crane and the drone, her damaged armor somehow functioning enough to allow movement. One hand gripped the drone's weapons port, crushing it with strength that should have been impossible in her condition. The other hand drove a blade, extended from her armor's wrist gauntlet, directly into the machine's sensor array. The drone emitted a high-pitched whine as its systems failed catastrophically. Sparks erupted from the damaged components, and its limbs thrashed in mechanical death throes before falling still. The woman swayed, then collapsed backward. Crane barely managed to catch her, lowering her gently to the floor of the shuttle as her armor's emergency systems re-engaged, forcing her back into a state of suspended animation to preserve her failing life functions. That was... Crane struggled to find words, still processing what he had witnessed. The woman shouldn't have been able to move, let alone destroy a hunter-killer drone with her bare hands. The strength and speed she had displayed suggested her armor's enhancement systems were still partially functional despite the damage. Or perhaps it was sheer willpower that had allowed her to override the armor's medical lockdown. Either way, she had saved his life, contradicting her earlier plea to be allowed to die. The contradiction fascinated Crane almost as much as it confused him. There was no time to dwell on it. However, the shuttle was beyond repair, its systems too damaged to support the woman's needs for long. They needed to reach Haven, and with the shuttle grounded, that meant continuing on foot. A daunting prospect given the woman's condition and the likely presence of more hunter-killer drones in the area. Crane checked the shuttle's navigation system, which flickered weakly, but still functioned. Haven was now 60 kilometers to the northeast, an impossible distance to carry an armored patient, even with the antigrav stretcher. "Computer, scan for alternative transportation within range," he requested, knowing it was a long shot. Scanning. Vehicle detected in Tunnel Section 7, 200 meters east of current position. Ground transport, military designation, operational status unknown. It was better than nothing. Crane gathered essential supplies, medical equipment, rations, weapons, and navigation tools, and loaded them onto the stretcher alongside the woman. Her armor had resealed itself, the helmet once again obscuring her features. But occasional tremors indicated the battle continuing within. "We're moving out," he told her, unsure if she could hear him through the armor's damaged systems. "Found us a potential ride. Just hang in there." Guiding the stretcher through the darkened tunnel was challenging, especially with the shuttle's lights no longer available. Crane relied on his suit's built-in illumination, which cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls. Occasionally, his light would catch the reflective eyes of tunnel dwellers, rats, and other creatures that had adapted to the post-war environment, watching his progress with wary curiosity. The vehicle, when they reached it, exceeded Crane's cautious hopes. It was a military transport, six-wheeled, heavily armored, and designed for exactly the kind of hostile terrain that awaited them above ground. More importantly, it appeared largely intact, sheltered from the worst of the war's destruction by the tunnel's protection. "Let's see if you still run," Crane murmured, accessing the vehicle's entry panel. To his surprise, the security system accepted his engineering override codes, suggesting the transport had been standard military issue, rather than specialized equipment with higher security clearance. The interior was dusty, but undamaged. Crane transferred the woman to the transport's rear compartment, which was equipped with rudimentary medical monitoring systems, not as sophisticated as the shuttles, but better than nothing. He connected her armor to the vehicle's power supply, hoping it would help stabilize the suit's failing systems. The engine started on the third attempt, sputtering before settling into a reassuring hum. Fuel levels showed half capacity, enough to reach Haven if they encountered no major obstacles. The navigation system came online after some coaxing, accepting the coordinates Crane input from his salvaged data. "Next stop, Haven," he announced, more to hear a human voice than because anyone was listening. "Estimated arrival time? Well, when we get there." The journey through the tunnel system was slow, but uneventful. The transport's powerful lights illuminating a path through darkness that had remained undisturbed for years. When they finally emerged into daylight, or what passed for it beneath the perpetual haze, Crane was momentarily blinded, his eyes having adjusted to the tunnel's gloom. The landscape that greeted them was a desolate panorama of destruction stretching to the horizon. Where forests had once stood, only blackened stumps remained, jutting from soil that had been scorched and poisoned. The road, once a major artery connecting urban centers, was now a fractured ribbon winding through a wasteland of craters and debris. Crane programmed the transport to follow the most navigable path toward Haven, relying on its advanced suspension to handle the treacherous terrain. Every few kilometers, he would stop to check on his passenger, whose condition continued to deteriorate despite his best efforts. The biological agent within her armor was accelerating its assault, perhaps triggered by the brief period of activity when she had defended him from the drone. Their progress was hampered not only by the damaged roads, but by the need to avoid open areas where hunter-killer drones might spot them. Crane kept to ravines and the shadows of ruined structures whenever possible, extending their journey but reducing the risk of detection. As night fell, bringing with it a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the transport's headlights, Crane was forced to make camp in the remains of a roadside service station. The concrete structure provided some shelter and a vantage point from which to monitor their surroundings. He parked the transport in what had once been the service bay, positioning it so they could depart quickly if necessary. The woman he transferred to a more comfortable position, propping her armored form against the wall where he could monitor her while preparing a small meal from his rations. As he ate the tasteless protein concentrate, Crane found himself talking to her, though he had no idea if she could hear him through the armor systems. "I've been alone on that station for 5 years," he said, between bites. "Monitoring communications, maintaining systems, waiting for someone to need the relay capabilities. I'm supposed to be there for another 3 years before my replacement arrives, assuming anyone remembers to send one." He laughed softly, the sound hollow in the abandoned building. "Funny thing is, I volunteered for the assignment. After everything that happened during the war, I wanted the solitude, thought it would help me process. 5 years later, I'm still processing, still waiting for clarity that never comes." The woman's armor emitted a series of soft clicks as internal systems adjusted, almost as if responding to his words. "I don't even know your name," Crane continued. "The Karnath clan were legends even before the war. Elite warriors, unmatched in combat. We studied your tactics at the academy, but the reports said you were all gone, wiped out by the same weapon that's inside your armor now." He moved closer, examining the discolored patches that had spread further across the armor's surface. "I'm going to get you to Haven," he promised. "They were working on countermeasures for biological weapons. If anyone can help you, it would be them, assuming anyone's still there." Crane fell silent, suddenly aware of how desperately he needed this woman to survive, not just for her sake, but for his own. She represented a connection to humanity that he had been missing for years, a purpose beyond the endless routine of station maintenance. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "Whatever you said before, about letting you die, you didn't mean it. Not really. Otherwise, you wouldn't have protected me from that drone." The armor remained silent, offering neither confirmation nor denial. Crane sighed and prepared for a few hours of rest, setting the transport's sensors to alert him to any movement outside their shelter. He slept fitfully, dreaming of orbital stations that crumbled beneath his feet and armored figures that reached for him with disintegrating hands. When the transport's alarm woke him shortly before dawn, it took several seconds to orient himself and remember where he was. The alarm wasn't signaling an external threat, but a medical crisis. The woman's vital signs had plummeted during the night, her armor systems failing to compensate for the accelerating infection. Crane rushed to her side, connecting his medical scanner directly to her helmet's diagnostic port. The readings confirmed his fears. Multiple organ systems beginning to fail, the biological agent having breached the armor's internal containment measures. "No, no, no," he muttered, frantically adjusting settings and administering emergency stimulants through the armor's medical ports. "Not now. We're close. Haven is less than 20 kilometers away." The woman's vital signs stabilized slightly in response to his interventions, but Crane knew he had only bought her a few hours at most. They needed to reach Haven immediately, regardless of the risks. He loaded her back into the transport and resumed their journey as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the perpetual haze. Caution gave way to urgency as Crane pushed the vehicle to its limits, navigating debris fields and radiation hotspots with reckless determination. The terrain grew more mountainous as they approached the coordinates for Haven, the road winding through passes that had partially collapsed during the war. Several times, Crane was forced to clear the path manually, moving boulders that blocked their progress while constantly checking the sky for drones. Finally, The navigation system indicated they had reached their destination. But Crane saw nothing that resembled a research facility, only a sheer rock face rising from the mountainside, unremarkable except for a narrow fissure that might once have been a carefully concealed entrance, now partially exposed by bombing. "This can't be right," Crane muttered, double-checking the coordinates. But the system insisted they had arrived at Haven's location. Leaving the woman in the transport, Crane approached the fissure on foot, his suit's sensors scanning for any sign of technology or human presence. As he drew closer, he detected faint energy readings emanating from within the crack, power systems, still functioning after all these years. The fissure was barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, opening into a tunnel that sloped downward into the mountain. Emergency lighting glowed at intervals along the passage, confirming that somewhere within, systems remained operational. Crane returned to the transport, carefully maneuvering it as close to the entrance as possible. Getting the woman through the narrow opening would be challenging, especially in her condition. But there was no alternative. Disconnecting her from the vehicle systems, he transferred her to the anti-grav stretcher once more, adjusting its width to the minimum setting. Even then, navigating the fissure required him to tilt the stretcher at precarious angles. Careful not to jostle his patient while squeezing through the narrowest sections. The tunnel beyond widened gradually, eventually opening into what had clearly been a receiving area for the underground facility. Security checkpoints stood abandoned, their systems dark. Beyond them, a massive blast door, partially open, revealed glimpses of the complex within. Crane guided the stretcher through the gap in the door, entering a space that contrasted sharply with the devastation above ground. Haven was largely intact, its reinforced structure having withstood the war's fury. Emergency lighting cast a soft blue glow over pristine corridors and laboratories designed for biological research. "Hello?" Crane called out, his voice echoing through the empty facility. "Is anyone here? We need medical assistance." Silence answered him, broken only by the soft hum of ventilation systems and the occasional drip of water from somewhere deeper in the complex. Crane consulted the directory mounted on the wall, locating the medical bay on the second sublevel. As he guided the stretcher through the complex, Crane felt a growing sense of unease. The facility showed no signs of battle damage or hasty evacuation, no scattered personal belongings, no evidence of panic. Instead, workstations were neatly organized, equipment properly stored, as though the staff had simply stepped out for a moment and would return at any time. The medical bay, when they reached it, was a state-of-the-art facility that would have been the envy of most pre-war hospitals. Advanced diagnostic equipment lined the walls, surrounding examination tables equipped with robotic surgical arms and monitoring systems. Crane transferred the woman from the stretcher to the central examination table, which activated automatically in response to her weight. Screens illuminated around them, displaying readouts of her condition as the table's systems interfaced with her armor. "Warning!" announced a synthetic voice, startling Crane with its sudden intrusion. "Biological contamination detected. Initiating quarantine protocols." Transparent barriers rose from the floor, enclosing the examination area in a sealed environment. Decontamination mist filled the space briefly, before being extracted through vents in the ceiling. "Quarantine established," the voice continued. "Patient requires immediate intervention. Biological agent identified as strain V89. Targeted Carnath pathogen." Crane approached the barrier, placing his hand against the transparent surface. "Can you treat it?" he asked, unsure if the system was truly autonomous or merely an interface for human medical staff. "Treatment protocols exist but require authorization and supervision. Please input medical credentials." Crane hesitated. He had basic field medical training, but nothing that would qualify him to oversee treatment for such a sophisticated biological weapon. "I don't have medical credentials," he admitted. "Is there anyone else here who can help?" A moment of silence, then, One authorized medical personnel detected within facility. Sending notification. Before Crane could ask further questions, he heard footsteps approaching from a connecting corridor. Turning, he found himself face to face with an elderly man whose white lab coat bore the faded insignia of Military Medical Corps. "Well," the man said, his voice raspy from disuse, "I haven't had visitors in quite some time, especially not ones bringing Karnath warriors infected with V89. His eyes, sharp despite his apparent age, assessed Crane with clinical precision. "You're not military, station personnel, based on your gear. What are you doing down here?" "I received her distress signal from orbit," Crane explained quickly. "Found her buried in ruins. The shuttle was damaged by drones, so we continued overland. The computer said this facility might have countermeasures for the biological weapon." The old man approached the quarantine barrier, studying the woman's armor with professional interest. "She's lasted longer than any other Karnath we treated. Their armor usually accelerates the infection, not sustains life through it." He looked back at Crane. "I'm Dr. Alexander Thorne. I was lead researcher here before. Well, before everyone else evacuated." "Crane, Orbital Station Epsilon." He gestured toward the woman. "Can you help her?" Thorne's expression turned grave. "Possibly. We developed experimental treatments for V89, but never had the chance to properly test them before the evacuation orders came. The few Karnath subjects we treated had already progressed too far for meaningful results." He moved to a nearby console, entering a complex series of commands. The examination table responded by extending additional equipment, scanner arms that began a more detailed analysis of the armor and its occupant. V89 was one of the most sophisticated bioweapons ever created, Thorne explained as he worked. Designed specifically to target Karnath genetic markers and integrate with their armor systems. It turns their greatest strength, the symbiotic relationship between warrior and armor, into their greatest vulnerability. "Who would create something like that?" Crane asked, watching as the scanners mapped the infection's spread through the armor systems. Thorne's mouth tightened. "Someone who understood Karnath technology intimately. Someone they trusted." He shook his head. "That's not important now. What matters is getting her out of that armor before the infection completes its final phase." "Final phase?" "V89 has 3 stages," Thorne explained, his fingers flying across the console. "First, it infiltrates the armor systems, corrupting life support and power distribution. Second, it uses those systems to deliver the pathogen to the host, causing progressive organ failure. The third stage is, well, they designed it to be spectacular. The armor's power core overloads, creating an explosion that spreads the pathogen to nearby targets." Crane felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "And she's in which stage?" "Transitioning to the third," Thorne replied grimly. "Which means we need to separate her from the armor immediately. The problem is, after this much time, the neural interfaces will have fused to her nervous system. Removing the armor incorrectly could kill her instantly." The doctor activated another set of controls. A robotic arm descended from the ceiling, injecting a blue substance into one of the armor's medical ports. "That's a neural buffer," Thorne explained. "It will temporarily interrupt the connection between her nervous system and the armor's interface, allowing us to begin the separation process." As they watched, the armor's external lights flickered, then stabilized at a lower intensity. The discolored patches stopped their spread, though they didn't recede. "Now for the hard part," Thorne muttered, initiating a new sequence. "We need to purge the biological agent from her bloodstream while simultaneously disengaging the armor's neural connectors. It's going to be painful for her, even sedated." The examination table tilted to a vertical position as additional robotic arms extended, attaching to specific points on the armor. Crane watched, fascinated and horrified, as the arms began the delicate process of disassembly, removing outer plates to expose the complex inner workings of the Karnath battle system. Beneath the external armor, a secondary layer of flexible material adhered directly to the woman's body, connected by hundreds of microscopic filaments that penetrated her skin to interface with nerves and blood vessels. This inner layer pulsed with an unhealthy light, evidence of the corruption spreading through it. The Karnath developed this technology over generations, Thorne said, his voice taking on a lecturer's tone despite the urgency of their task. It's not just armor. It's the extension of themselves. The neural interfaces allow them to control the suit as naturally as their own limbs, while the biological components enhance strength, speed, and sensory perception. One of the monitoring screens showed the woman's vital signs spiking as the robotic arms began detaching the neural interfaces. Even sedated, her body registered the trauma of separation. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Crane asked, feeling helpless as he watched the painful procedure. Thorne considered him for a moment. "Actually, yes. The decontamination chamber next door contains prototypes of the countermeasure we developed for V89. Bring me the vials marked Antigen C. They should be in the refrigerated storage unit." Grateful for a task, Crane hurried to the adjacent room, where he found the storage unit Thorne had described. Inside, neatly labeled vials contained various colored liquids, each marked with alphanumeric codes. The Antigen C vials contained a deep purple solution that seemed to shimmer slightly as he removed them from storage. When he returned, Thorne was carefully extracting a section of the inner armor layer from the woman's right arm, revealing skin mottled with spreading discoloration, the pathogen's direct effect on her tissues. "Perfect timing," the doctor said, taking the vials. "This should neutralize the biological component of V89, but the armor itself is still contaminated. We'll need to destroy it completely once she's free." Thorne loaded the antigen into an injection system that would deliver it directly to the woman's bloodstream through the armor's existing medical ports. As the purple liquid flowed into the suit, the unhealthy glow of the inner layer began to fade, replaced by a more natural bioluminescence. "It's working," Thorne said with cautious optimism. "The antigen is binding to the pathogen, neutralizing its effects. Now we need to accelerate the removal of the armor before the power core enters critical failure." The next hour was an intricate dance of technology and medical expertise, as Thorne directed the robotic systems in the painstaking process of separating woman from armor. Each neural connection had to be carefully disengaged, each biological interface detached without damaging the underlying tissue. Throughout the procedure, the woman remained unconscious, though occasional spikes in her vital signs suggested she experienced the separation even through sedation. Finally, the last section of inner armor was removed, revealing a slender figure marked by the distinctive patterns of neural interface points, hundreds of tiny scars arranged in geometric patterns across her skin. Beneath these artificial markings, traditional Karnath clan tattoos covered her shoulders and upper back, identifying her as a high-ranking warrior. Freed from the corrupted armor, her vital signs began to stabilize, though she remained critically ill from months of exposure to the pathogen. Thorne administered additional treatments, antibiotics, immune boosters, cellular regeneration compounds, while the quarantine system disposed of the contaminated armor pieces, incinerating them at temperatures high enough to ensure no trace of the biological agent remained. "She'll need extensive rehabilitation," Thorne said, studying the readouts. "Muscle atrophy, nerve damage, potential psychological trauma from prolonged fusion with the corrupted systems. But she's young and strong. The Karnath are remarkably resilient." Crane stared at the woman's face, now fully visible for the first time. Without the helmet and the distortion of the cracked visor, he could see the delicate features that contrasted with the warrior's strength she had displayed. Her hair, cropped short in military fashion, was a deep auburn, though patchy in places where the neural interfaces had required access to her scalp. "Will she recover completely?" he asked. Thorne's expression was guarded. Physically, given time and proper care. Yes. Mentally. He shrugged. The Karnath share a unique bond with their armor. Having it corrupted, being forced to separate from it. That's a trauma we don't fully understand. It would be like losing a limb, but more intimate. The quarantine barriers retracted as the system confirmed decontamination was complete. Thorne moved to a storage cabinet, retrieving medical supplies that would be needed for the woman's ongoing care. "You're welcome to stay," he told Crane. Haven was designed to be self-sufficient. Hydroponics for food, geothermal power, water purification. I've been here alone since the evacuation 3 years ago, continuing my research. Having company would make a pleasant change. Crane nodded, grateful for the invitation. With the shuttle destroyed and the orbital station too far to reach without proper transportation, Haven represented their best chance for survival and for the woman's recovery. "I should contact the station," he said. "Let them know I won't be returning immediately." Thorne directed him to a communications center on the upper level, where Crane was able to establish a tenuous connection with Epsilon Station. The message he sent was necessarily brief, explaining his situation without detail and requesting a recovery team when possible. He knew it might be months before anyone responded. His prolonged absence would be noted eventually, but immediate rescue was unlikely given the station's limited resources. In the days that followed, Crane divided his time between assisting Thorne with the woman's treatment and exploring Haven's extensive facilities. The complex was larger than he had initially estimated, comprising multiple levels of laboratories, living quarters, and support systems. Most areas remained in excellent condition, protected from the devastation above by the mountain's natural shield and the facility's reinforced structure. Thorne proved to be a knowledgeable, if somewhat eccentric companion. Years of isolation had given him peculiar habits, talking to equipment as though it could respond, maintaining rigid schedules regardless of necessity, cataloging and recataloguing supplies with obsessive precision. But his medical expertise was unquestionable, and under his care, the woman began to show signs of improvement. On the 5th day, she regained consciousness briefly. Crane was sitting beside her bed, reviewing data on a tablet, when he noticed her eyes open, the same startling green he had glimpsed through the cracked visor. "Where?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "You're safe," Crane assured her. "We're in a facility called Haven. You had a biological infection in your armor. Dr. Thorne removed it and administered an antigen." The woman's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "My armor? It had to be destroyed," Crane explained gently. "The infection had corrupted it completely. It was killing you." She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping to track down her temple. "Without it, I am nothing." Before Crane could respond, she had slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving him troubled by her words. The identity between warrior and armor was clearly more profound than he had realized, making its loss not just physical, but existential. When Thorne returned from his laboratory, Crane related the brief conversation. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "The Karnath begin bonding with training armor from early childhood," he explained. "By adulthood, it's as much a part of their identity as their own bodies. More, in some ways, warriors like her, who would have received full neural integration, experience the world through the armor's enhanced senses. Without it, everything feels muted, diminished." "Can she adapt?" Crane asked. "With time and support," Thorne said. "But she'll need a purpose beyond combat. The Karnath define themselves through their role as warriors. With her clan gone and her armor destroyed, she'll need to find a new identity." The woman, who eventually revealed her name to be Serena, drifted in and out of consciousness over the next week, each period of wakefulness lasting longer than the last. Her physical recovery progressed well under Thorne's care, but emotionally, she remained withdrawn, speaking little and avoiding eye contact. Crane continued to sit with her during his free hours, sometimes reading aloud from Haven's extensive digital library, other times simply working quietly nearby. He sensed that his presence provided some comfort, though she rarely acknowledged him directly. 2 weeks after their arrival at Haven, Serena was strong enough to leave her bed for short periods. Crane found her one evening in the observation room, a space designed to resemble an outdoor garden, complete with hydroponically grown plants and artificial sunlight that mimicked the natural cycle. She stood beside a young tree that had somehow thrived despite years of minimal attention, her fingers gently tracing the pattern of its bark. Without her armor, dressed in simple medical garments, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable, yet no less imposing in her quiet dignity. "My clan had gardens," she said without turning, apparently sensing his presence. "Not like this. Real ones. Open to the sky. We believed plants carried the memories of the earth, that by tending them, we honored those who came before us." Crane approached cautiously, stopping a respectful distance away. "Your clan's home. Where was it?" "The northern ranges," Serena replied. "Mountains higher than these, with forests that stretched beyond sight. Our fortress was carved into the living rock, but we built terraces for growing food and medicinal herbs." A faint smile touched her lips before fading. "It's all gone now, burned and poisoned in the first wave of attacks." "I'm sorry," Crane said, knowing the words were inadequate. "Were you there when it happened?" She shook her head. "I was deployed off-world with my unit. We were sabotaging enemy supply lines when the attack came. By the time we returned—" Her voice trailed off, the memory clearly painful. "And the rest of your unit?" "Dead. Some in battle. Others from the same weapon that infected my armor." Serena finally turned to face him. "Why did you save me, Engineer Crane? I told you to let me die." Crane considered his answer carefully. "At first, it was duty. I couldn't ignore a distress signal. That's what I've been trained for. What I've been doing alone on that station for 5 years." He paused. "But then, it became more than duty. You saved my life in the tunnel, fighting that drone when you should have been physically incapable of movement. I couldn't abandon someone with that kind of will to live, even if they said otherwise." Serena studied him with those intense green eyes. "It wasn't will to live. It was reflex, the armor responding to threat, and me responding with it. After so many years of integration, some reactions bypass conscious thought." "I don't believe that," Crane said. "The armor was failing. Your neural connections were compromised. That wasn't reflex. It was choice." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "Then I made the wrong choice. What am I now, without my clan, without my armor? A warrior with no battle to fight, no people to protect." "You're alive," Crane said simply. "That's not nothing. And while your clan may be gone, there are still people who need protection. The war ended, but its weapons remain. Drones like the one that attacked us. Biological agents like the one in your armor. The world is trying to rebuild, but it needs people who understand what was lost." Serena was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the small tree. "In Karnath tradition, when a warrior falls in battle, we plant a tree over their remains. The armor is buried first, as it is closest to the soul. Then, the body above it. We believe the warrior's spirit nourishes the tree, allowing them to continue protecting the clan by providing shelter and sustenance." She touched a leaf gently. "I have no body to bury, but my armor, what remains of it after decontamination, could be laid to rest. Perhaps then, I could begin to accept this new existence." Crane nodded, understanding the importance of ritual in processing loss. "We could arrange that. There's a small valley near Haven's entrance that gets enough filtered sunlight for plants to grow. It would be a suitable place. For the first time since her recovery began, Serena's expression softened. I would be grateful. With Thorne's approval, they planned a simple ceremony for the following day. The doctor had preserved the central control module of Serena's armor, the only component that could be fully decontaminated for research purposes, but agreed it rightfully belonged to the warrior who had worn it. Crane spent hours preparing the site, digging a hole beneath the strongest tree in the small valley outside Haven's concealed entrance. The air was still hazardous, without protection, requiring him to wear his environmental suit. But the soil showed signs of recovery. Hardy plants had begun to reclaim the scorched earth, their stubborn growth a testament to nature's resilience. When everything was ready, he escorted Serena to the surface. She walked slowly, still weakened by her ordeal, but insisted on making the journey without assistance. Thorne provided her with a protective suit, modified to accommodate her diminished strength, and monitored her vital signs remotely from within the facility. The valley, nestled between rocky outcroppings, was sheltered from the worst of the atmospheric toxins. Filtered sunlight illuminated the small clearing where Crane had prepared the grave, casting dappled shadows through the leaves of the surviving tree. Serena carried the control module cradled in her arms like a precious child. Despite its sophisticated technology, the module resembled a simple metal sphere, its surface etched with Karnath symbols, representing protection and honor. When they reached the prepared site, Crane stepped back, allowing Serena to conduct the ritual according to her traditions. She knelt beside the hole, placed the module carefully within, and covered it with soil using her bare hands, having removed her protective gloves despite the risk. As she worked, she spoke in the ancient Karnath language, words Crane couldn't understand, but recognized as a prayer or farewell from the cadence and solemnity. When the module was completely buried, she pressed both palms against the freshly turned earth, her head bowed in silent communion with what she had lost. Crane watched with respectful silence, moved by the warrior's grief, yet hopeful for her healing. The ritual, though brief, seemed to provide Serena with a measure of peace she had lacked since awakening. When she finally rose and stepped back from the grave, there was a subtle change in her posture, a straightening of the shoulders, a lifting of the chin, as though a burden had been partially relieved. "Thank you," she said simply, replacing her protective gloves. "You're welcome," Crane replied. "I hope it helps." Serena gazed at the mound of earth beneath the tree. "In our tradition, this tree now carries a piece of me, the warrior I was. Perhaps what remains can become something new, something still worthy of life." The journey back to Haven was made in companionable silence, both lost in their own reflections. As they approached the facility's entrance, Serena paused, looking back at the valley where her armor now rested. "You called me beautiful once," she said unexpectedly. "When you found me in the ruins." Crane felt heat rise in his face, surprised she had heard him through the damaged helmet. I didn't realize you were conscious." "Not fully," she admitted. "But certain words penetrated the haze. You said I was beautiful in the way survivors of hell are beautiful, marked by pain, but unbroken by it." She turned to face him. "You were looking at my armor then, seeing only what protected me, not what I am beneath it." "And what are you beneath it?" Crane asked softly. Serena considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know yet," she finally answered. "For so long, the armor defined me, warrior, protector, weapon. Without it, I am unfinished, a beginning rather than an end." Crane nodded in understanding. "Beginnings are valuable, especially after so much has ended." They continued into the facility, removing their protective gear in the decontamination chamber. Thorne was waiting for them in the medical bay, ready to check Serena's condition after the exertion and emotional strain of the ceremony. "How do you feel?" the doctor asked as he reviewed her vital signs. "Lighter," Serena replied after a moment's consideration. As though I've set down a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. Thorne smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Good. That's progress. He turned to Crane. While you were conducting your ceremony, I received a transmission from Orbital Command. They've acknowledged your situation and are sending a recovery team, not just for you, but for all of us. Apparently, Haven is being recommissioned as part of the reconstruction effort. Crane felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief at the prospect of rescue, uncertainty about returning to the isolation of Epsilon Station, and an unexpected reluctance to leave Haven and its occupants. When will they arrive? He asked. 3 weeks, give or take, Thorne replied. Enough time for Serena to regain more of her strength. They're bringing medical personnel and supplies, so her recovery can continue even after transport. Serena looked between them, her expression unreadable. Where will they take us? You have options, Thorne told her. The remaining Karnath survivors have established a settlement in the Southern Territories. Or you could request placement in one of the recovery centers, being established for war veterans. And what about you? She asked Crane. Will you return to your station? The question caught him off guard. He had assumed he would, having never considered an alternative. His assignment to Epsilon was for 8 years. He had completed 5, with 3 remaining. But the prospect suddenly felt hollow. The lonely routine of station maintenance, no longer the sanctuary it had once seemed. I don't know, he admitted. My duty is to the station, but duties can change, Thorne interjected. The recovery team's orders include a reassessment of personnel assignments. Given what you've accomplished here, surviving surface conditions, transporting a critical patient across hostile territory, assisting with advanced medical procedures, you've demonstrated skills that might be more valuable elsewhere. The implication hung in the air. Crane could request reassignment, potentially to a position that wouldn't condemn him to years of continued isolation. The 3 weeks before the recovery team's arrival passed quickly, filled with preparation and rehabilitation. Serena grew stronger each day, her body healing from the ravages of the biological weapon and the trauma of separation from her armor. She still struggled with the diminished sensory input of her unaugmented state, but adapted with remarkable resilience, developing new ways to interact with her environment. Crane found himself drawn to her determination. The quiet dignity with which she faced her changed circumstances. They spent hours together in the observation room, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence as they watched the artificial day cycle progress. He learned more about Karnath culture, their reverence for natural systems, their complex social structures built around warrior clans, their belief in balance between technology and biological processes. In turn, he shared stories of his own upbringing in one of the orbital educational facilities, where children of station personnel received specialized training for space-based operations. Their backgrounds could hardly have been more different. She born to a warrior tradition rooted in ancient Earth. He raised among the stars with no connection to the ground beneath his feet. Yet, they found common ground in their experiences of loss and adaptation, in their appreciation for the fragile beauty that persisted even after devastation. Thorne observed their growing connection with knowing eyes, but made no comment, focusing instead on preparing Haven's research data for transfer to the recovery team. Years of isolation had given him time to develop potential treatments for other biological weapons that remained active in contaminated areas. Information that could save countless lives as reconstruction efforts expanded. The day before the recovery team's scheduled arrival, Crane found Serena in the hydroponics section, tending to the small plants that provided fresh vegetables for their meals. Her hands, once accustomed to weapons and armor controls, now moved with gentle precision among the delicate stems and leaves. Dr. Thorne says you've been asking about agricultural training programs, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Serena nodded without looking up. The Southern Territories need people who understand how to reclaim poisoned soil. the surviving Karnath, have agricultural knowledge from our mountain terraces, but lack experience with the new purification techniques being developed. So you've decided to join them? She straightened, wiping her hands on the simple coveralls she now wore instead of medical garments. I've decided to be useful again, she clarified. The warrior I was is buried beneath that tree outside. What remains needs purpose. Crane hesitated, then took a step into the room. I've been thinking about purpose too, about what happens after tomorrow. Serena regarded him with those penetrating green eyes. And what have you decided, Engineer Crane? That isolation isn't healing anymore, he admitted. 5 years alone on that station. It gave me time to process what happened during the war, but also time to hide from moving forward. He drew a deep breath. I'm requesting reassignment to the surface reconstruction teams, specifically those working in the Southern Territories. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or cautious hope, crossed Serena's features. The environment is still hostile. Your engineering skills would be valuable, but the conditions are challenging, Crane finished for her. But I've managed this far, and I've had a good teacher in survival. He smiled slightly. Besides, I've seen what technology and determination can accomplish together. Your armor kept you alive against impossible odds. Imagine what we could build with that same spirit, but focused on creation rather than survival. Serena studied him for a long moment, as though seeing him clearly for the first time. You called me beautiful once, she said again, echoing her words from the day of the burial ceremony. But you hadn't seen what I was beneath the armor. And now? Crane asked softly. Now you've seen more, she acknowledged. Not everything. There are depths even I haven't fully explored yet, but enough to make this choice with open eyes. She held his gaze steadily. The Southern Territories are not Epsilon Station. There are no walls to protect you from others, no distance to maintain. Crane understood what she was really asking. Was he prepared for connection after so many years of isolation? For the messiness and complexity of human relationships after the ordered solitude of his station? I don't want walls anymore, he said simply. Or distance. Serena's expression softened, the warrior's discipline giving way to something more vulnerable, more human. She extended her hand, soil still lingering beneath her fingernails, calluses forming where armor interfaces had once connected, an offering more significant than words could express. Crane took it without hesitation, his engineer's hands, precise and methodical, enfolding hers. In that touch was a promise neither needed to articulate. Whatever came next, they would face it not as warrior and engineer, not as patient and rescuer, but as two survivors finding their way forward together. The recovery team arrived the following morning, their shuttle touching down in the small valley near Haven's entrance. They brought supplies, medical personnel, and news of the world beyond their isolated sanctuary, stories of communities rebuilding, of environment slowly healing, of humanity refusing to surrender to the war's devastation. As preparations for departure began, Crane made one final visit to the tree, where Serena's armor lay buried. The small mound had already settled, becoming part of the landscape as though it had always belonged there. He placed his hand briefly on the trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath his palm, and made a silent promise to return someday when the air was clean enough to stand beneath its branches without protection. When he returned to the facility, he found Serena waiting near the entrance, a small pack containing her few possessions slung over her shoulder. She too had changed from the warrior he had discovered in the ruins, still strong, still bearing the marks of her past, but softened somehow, open to possibilities beyond battle and survival. Ready? He asked. Serena nodded, casting one last glance at the facility that had sheltered her transformation. Not an ending, she murmured, as though reminding herself. A beginning. Together. They stepped out into the pale sunlight, walking side by side toward the waiting shuttle. Behind them, Haven stood as a monument to preservation and healing. Ahead, an uncertain future beckoned with both challenge and promise. As they boarded the shuttle, Serena paused at the threshold, looking back at the tree visible in the distance, the marker of what she had been, the nurturer of what she might become. "You called me beautiful," she said one final time, her voice barely audible above the shuttle's systems. "But you hadn't seen what I was beneath the armor." Crane followed her gaze to the solitary tree, then back to her face, scarred but serene, marked by experience but unbroken by it. "I see you now," he said simply. And as the shuttle door closed behind them, sealing them in for the journey to their new beginning, Serena smiled. A full, unguarded expression that transformed her face and confirmed what Crane had known from the first moment he'd found her in the ruins. That beauty resided not in perfection, but in resilience. Not in armor, but in the courage to live without it.